If anyone were to ask me about the happiest days of my marriage, I would not hesitate to talk about the afternoons spent on the porch with my father-in-law, Arthur. He was a retired carpenter with calloused hands, but an infinitely warm heart. He would teach me how to identify different types of wood by their scent, and tell me stories about the houses he helped build throughout this Philadelphia suburb. In his eyes, I wasn't just his son's wife. I was a daughter. He was the only person in the Peterson family who truly saw me. And then, he was gone. A sudden heart attack took him from us on a bleak autumn morning, and with him, all the warmth in this house seemed to vanish. The change in my mother-in-law, Margaret, was almost instantaneous. Right after the funeral, when the last relatives had left, she looked at me, exhausted after days of caring for everyone, and said in a cold voice, "The kitchen floor is filthy. Clean it." That was the beginning. My life turned into a series of silent torment. Margaret, who had previously rarely set foot in the kitchen, now became a strict overseer. Everything I did was wrong. The soup I made was too salty. The dishes I washed still had water spots. The rug I had just vacuumed still had a single hair on it. She would follow me, wearing white gloves, and run her fingers over surfaces, showing me invisible specks of dust. "I taught my Thomas to live in absolute cleanliness," she would often say, her voice full of contempt. "It seems you weren't so carefully brought up." My husband, Thomas, never said a word to defend me. He, their only son, was a tall man with a pleasant smile, but inside, he was tragically weak. He worshipped his mother, and her every word was law. "Mom just wants what's best for us. Isabella," he would say when I tried to complain. "You just need to try a little harder." And I did try. God, how I tried. I would wake up at 5 in the morning to prepare a perfect breakfast for the family. I cleaned, did laundry, gardened, trying to make the house a flawless place by Margaret's standards. But all my efforts were in vain. Her satisfaction was a mountain I could never climb. When I became pregnant, a glimmer of hope sparked within me. Perhaps a grandchild would soften her heart, but that hope was brutally extinguished on the day I gave birth. When the nurse carried my tiny daughter, Lily, out of the delivery room and announced, "Congratulations, it's a girl," I saw the smile on Margaret's face freeze. She didn't even bother to hold her grandchild. "A girl," she muttered, her voice full of disappointment. "The Peterson family needs a male heir. What good is a daughter?" From that day on, Lily became a new excuse for her to torment me. She complained that the baby cried too loudly. She complained that I didn't know how to breastfeed. She compared my baby to the neighbor's sons, those chubby, healthy boys. "Look," she said to Thomas right in front of me, "if she had given birth to a son, maybe he wouldn't have been so frail." And Thomas, what did he do? He just nodded. "You're right, Mom. She does look a bit scrawny." Their cruelty was not just in words, it was in their actions. The climax of everything was when Thomas received news of his inheritance. Arthur, with the carefulness of a man who had worked his entire life, had left a trust fund worth $200,000. According to the lawyer, the fund would be settled 1 year after his passing, once all the paperwork was complete. For Thomas, the news was like a winning lottery ticket. The next day, he quit his job. "Why should I work anymore?" he said to me casually when I asked. "With $200,000, we can live comfortably. I need time to relax. You know, to find myself." To find himself for Thomas meant spending his days at the golf club or drinking beer with his friends. He would come home in the evenings, reeking of alcohol and self-satisfaction, and join his mother in berating me. He criticized my disheveled appearance after giving birth. He complained that Lily's crying disturbed his afternoon naps. He treated me and our daughter like burdens, obstacles on his path to a life of ease and luxury. I lived in that hell. A hell concealed by the facade of a typical suburban middle-class family. I endured it for my daughter and for the memory of Arthur. I told myself that this was just a difficult phase, that one day Thomas would grow up. But I was wrong. Things only got worse. The final tragedy struck on a Tuesday evening. I had just put Lily to sleep when I heard laughter from the living room downstairs. Thomas's voice, Margaret's voice, and another woman's voice. A shrill, unfamiliar voice. I held my sleeping daughter, tiptoeing down the stairs. The sight before me made my blood run cold. Thomas was sitting on the sofa, hand in hand with a young, blonde, scantily clad woman. And sitting across from them, smiling encouragingly, was my mother-in-law. "Oh, Isabella," Margaret said when she saw me, without a hint of embarrassment. "Come down, dear. I'd like to introduce you to Tiffany, a very special friend of Thomas's." "Special friend?" I repeated, my voice trembling. The girl named Tiffany looked me up and down, a smug smile on her face. "Hi, I've heard so much about you from Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. In that moment, my mind spun, trying to piece things together. Tiffany. The name sounded familiar. Then it hit me. Tiffany Hayes. The daughter of real estate magnate Jonathan Hayes, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Philadelphia. I had seen her picture in society magazines. And then everything clicked. The golf course. The meetings with friends where Thomas had squandered so much of his father's savings. It turned out they weren't just simple outings. It was a hunt. He wasn't just looking for a fling. He was looking for a shortcut. A comfortable leather seat in the Hayes Corporation. And me? Who was I in this picture? I was just Isabella, the woman who worked part-time at the Sweet Corner Bakery on the corner. It was a job I loved. The smell of butter and sugar always brought me peace, but in my mother-in-law's eyes, it was a disgrace. "My son could have married anyone," she once said to a relative over the phone, loud enough for me to hear, "and he chose a baker who always smells of flour." Her contempt for me wasn't just because I hadn't given birth to a son. It was rooted in her belief that I was poor, that I wasn't up to her standards. It was so ridiculous. She and her son were living lavishly off of Arthur's remaining money, spending it extravagantly on designer clothes and expensive golf outings. Yet they had the audacity to be sanctimonious and look down on my honest wages. Their hypocrisy sickened me. Thomas stood up, not even looking at me. "Tiffany will be staying here for a while," he announced, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "The guest room is at the end of the hall. You can go clean it up." Margaret nodded in approval. "That's right. Tiffany is a valued guest of this family. You must treat her with the utmost care." I stood there, clutching my tiny daughter, looking at the three of them. My husband, a coward trying to cling to another woman's dress for a leg up. My mother-in-law, a cruel and hypocritical woman, and his mistress. They were publicly humiliating me, trampling on my dignity right in my own home. And they expected me to clean the room for my husband's mistress. In that moment, I no longer felt pain. I no longer felt despair. I only felt a cold emptiness. And then a fire began to ignite deep within. A fire of fury. They had pushed me too far. They had underestimated my endurance. And they were about to pay for it. The following weeks passed in a hazy nightmare. Tiffany had officially moved into the guest room, turning my home into her territory. The scent of her expensive perfume permeated every corner, overpowering even the smell of baking that I loved. I had become an invisible maid in my own house, serving my husband and his mistress, all under my mother-in-law's malicious supervision. Margaret and Thomas no longer hid their contempt. They openly discussed their plans for the $200,000 in front of me, a new sports car for Thomas, a European trip for Margaret and her future daughter-in-law, Tiffany. They talked about it as if I were heir, as if my existence was just a temporary inconvenience. "Just wait until Dad's will is announced," Thomas told Tiffany. During a dinner I had painstakingly cooked. "We'll get out of this place and start our real life." I remained silent, head bowed, eating my rice, tears welling up, but I swallowed them back. Every word was a knife, but it also tempered my fury into something as hard as steel. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew Judgment Day would come. And it came in the form of a letter from the lawyer's office, setting the date for the official reading of Arthur's will. The will reading was held in the Petersons' living room. The room, with its oak furniture that Arthur had made himself, now felt stifling and tense. All the close relatives were present. Margaret's siblings, a few of Thomas's cousins, and Aunt Carol, Arthur's sister, a stern and straightforward woman who had been appointed the executor of the will. The family lawyer, Mr. Davies, an elderly man with horn-rimmed glasses, sat in the most prominent position. Margaret and Thomas were dressed as if they were about to attend an awards ceremony. She wore a silk dress with a pearl necklace. Thomas wore an expensive suit, looking ridiculous with his usual lazy expression. Tiffany sat beside him, possessively holding his arm, giving me a brazenly pitying look. I wore a simple dress and sat quietly in a corner, holding my peacefully sleeping Lily. I was an audience member in the play of my own downfall. Aunt Carol stood, holding a thick folder of documents. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice clear and emotionless. "We are here today to carry out the last wishes of my brother, Arthur Peterson." She began reading, going through the standard provisions, small donations to the church, a few mementos for distant relatives. The tension in the room grew. Margaret began to lose patience, tapping her fingers on the armrest of her chair. Finally, Aunt Carol came to the most important part, regarding the main assets, including the trust fund established on May 12, 2020, with a total value of $200,000. $200,000. Margaret and Thomas both leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with greed. Aunt Carol took a breath, then read loud and clear. "I, Arthur Peterson, being of sound and disposing mind and memory, do hereby bequeath the entirety of the aforementioned fund to my beloved daughter-in-law, Isabella Rossi Peterson." If a bomb had just exploded in the living room, it probably wouldn't have caused a greater shock. For a second, the entire room was silent. Then, Margaret let out a laugh. A sharp, cynical laugh. "Carol, are you joking? That's not funny at all." When Aunt Carol just looked back at her in silence, Margaret's laugh died. She stood up, trembling with rage, pointing a finger directly at me, who was sitting stunned in the corner. "Her?" she bellowed, her voice piercing. "Has Arthur lost his mind? Give the money to her, a girl who has nothing?" She turned to the stunned relatives, beginning her venomous tirade. "Look at her. Just look. Does she deserve that money? A girl from a working-class family in South Philly, a place that only knows the smell of grease and cheap beer. What has she brought to this Peterson family besides the clothes on her back?" She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. What does she even do for a living? "A baker. She smells of butter and sugar all day. What does she know about money, about investments, about maintaining a family legacy? She'll throw all that money away on her ovens and her foolish recipes." Her rage escalated. And most importantly, she couldn't even fulfill the most basic duty of giving this family a grandson to carry on the name. She only gave birth to a wild duck who will just fly away. She has ended the Peterson family line. A woman who can't bear a son, a failed wife, and she's entitled to the inheritance? This is a farce. Finally, she turned to Aunt Carol, her anger now a direct accusation. "It was you. You must have forged the will. You conspired with her to rob my son of his inheritance. Thomas is the one who deserves it. He is the only son, the only bloodline of the Peterson family." Thomas, incited by his mother's words, also stood up and joined in. "That's right, this will is fake. I'll sue." In the midst of the chaos, Aunt Carol remained remarkably calm. She raised her hand. "Silence!" Her voice, full of authority, made everyone fall quiet. "I knew there would be objections," she said, looking directly at Margaret and Thomas. "That's why Arthur left one more thing." She deliberately took a black USB stick from her purse and handed it to the lawyer, Mr. Davies. He wanted everyone to hear. This is his final message. Mr. Davies plugged the USB into his laptop, connecting it to a small Bluetooth speaker on the table. He pressed play, and then Arthur's familiar voice rang out, filling the deathly silence of the room. His voice was a little weak, but it was clear and full of emotion. "To my family, if you are hearing this recording, it means I am gone. Please do not grieve too much. I had a full life." His voice paused for a moment, then continued, but this time with a deep sadness. "In my final months, I learned a bitter lesson about loneliness. I thought I would be surrounded by the love of my wife and son. But no, I lay in bed, listening to their laughter from downstairs, to them talking about trips, about new cars. But no one brought me a glass of water when my throat was parched. I called, but they said they were busy. I heard the doorbell, heard them welcoming Thomas's special guest, but no one bothered to check if this old man was still breathing. I heard a choked sob from a cousin in the corner. Margaret and Thomas stood frozen, their faces ashen. Arthur's voice returned, this time warmer. But there was one person who didn't forget me, Isabella. The girl, despite enduring the coldness of her own family, stayed by my side. She read the paper to me every morning. She told me about little things in the neighborhood, about how the rose bush in the garden had bloomed. She brought Lily into the room, placing her tiny hand in mine. My granddaughter's smile was the last light I saw in those dark days. I hugged Lily tightly, tears streaming down my cheeks. His voice became sharp, and I also saw the truth. I saw the greed in my wife's eyes, the laziness and foolishness in my son's eyes. They were not waiting for me to get well. They were waiting for me to die to take my asset. This money is the result of my life's work, my blood and sweat. I cannot and will not give it to a selfish fool and a lazy man who would throw it away on useless pleasures. Therefore, I will give it to the only person who deserves it. The only person in this house who still possesses kindness and intelligence. I give everything to Isabella, with the hope that she and my granddaughter, Lily, will use it to build a better life, away from the toxicity of this house. That is my final wish. The recording ended. The silence in the room was deafening. It was a horrifying, heavy silence, broken only by Margaret's gasping breaths. The voice from Arthur's grave had just passed judgment on them. Mr. Davies unplugged the USB from his laptop, taking the small speaker. He put it all back in his briefcase. And then Margaret screamed, a primal scream of fury and desperation. "No! You bastard! Liar!" She lunged toward Aunt Carol like a wounded animal. "It was you! What spell did you cast on him? This is all your fault!" The other relatives rushed to intervene, holding her back. Held back, she screamed a sentence that revealed the naked truth. "I've waited so many years. I had to tolerate his cold, dry nature just to wait for this day." She didn't know Arthur had seen through their marriage as just a play for money long ago. Thomas staggered back, bumping into a small table and collapsing onto the floor. His eyes were vacant, empty. No inheritance, no life of ease. Everything had fallen apart. He suddenly came to life, his eyes crazed as he looked toward me. He crawled, yes, he crawled, on the floor, on his hands and knees, to my feet. "Bella, Isabella, I'm so sorry," he sobbed, clutching at the hem of my dress. "I was a fool. I was wrong. Please, talk to Aunt Carol, talk to the lawyer. We can split the money. I'll leave Tiffany. I'll do anything. Please." I looked down at the man begging at my feet, the man who, along with his mother, had put me through hell. There was not a single ounce of emotion left in my heart for him. I took a step back, looking down at the begging man at my feet, a cold disgust welling up inside me. "No, Thomas," I said, my voice no longer ice, but the sharpness of a blade. "It's too late." I looked at him, then glanced at Tiffany, who stood frozen nearby. It was time for this uninvited guest to know the truth. "Are you sorry, Thomas? Are you sorry for deceiving me, or are you sorry that your pathetic plan failed?" Thomas looked up, his face bewildered. Tiffany frowned. "Did you think I was too stupid to see?" I continued, my voice full of contempt. "The expensive golf outings that you squandered Dad's money on, the sudden appearance of Tiffany, your mother's unusually enthusiastic support. It was all just a pathetic play, and you two were the worst actors." I turned to look directly into Thomas's eyes. "You two planned to use that $200,000 inheritance as bait, to prove your class, and then latch onto Tiffany. Once you married her, a seat on the Hayes' corporation board would surely be yours, wouldn't it? Your mother would also become the powerful in-law she always dreamed of." I turned to Tiffany, her perfect face contorting, like a piece of cloth being wrung out. "But now what, Thomas? The bait is gone. You don't have a cent to your name. Do you really think someone like Tiffany here," I gestured with my chin towards her, "will accept a failure with no money, no status, and a greedy mother like you two?" Tiffany froze, and then a fury erupted on her beautiful face. She didn't look at me. She stared at Thomas and Margaret. "Board of directors?" she hissed, her voice sharp, as broken glass. You two dared to use me as a stepping stone? She strode up to Thomas, who was still kneeling on the floor, and unexpectedly delivered a resounding slap. You coward! You pathetic leech! Who do you think you are? Trying to use me. You think I'll marry a man who mooches off his father's inheritance and now has nothing? She turned to Margaret. And you old schemer. You think you can become in-laws with the Hayes family? In your dream. Tiffany stepped back, straightened her designer dress, her face filled with disgust. Listen to me, Thomas. Maybe you don't know, but the 3 golf courses you frequent, Pine Valley, Oakmont, and Marion, are all owned by my family. As of today, you are permanently banned. Don't worry, I'll refund your membership fees, so you have something to get by on during the difficult days ahead. I'll send your photo to all the managers there. She sneered. And I'll make sure you won't have a peaceful time at any other golf course in the state either, you scum. With that, she turned on her heel, strode out the door, and slammed it shut, leaving a deathly silence and 2 completely ruined people behind. Tiffany's dramatic exit left a dead silence in the room. All eyes were now on the 2 people who had completely collapsed. Margaret, who moments ago was screaming like an avenging goddess, now seemed to have run out of all strength. She slid to the floor, her back against the wall, her eyes vacant. I've waited so many years. She muttered, not a shout, but a mournful whisper, a lament for a life wasted on toxic endurance and bottomless greed. Thomas was still kneeling on the floor where I had left him. He was no longer crying or begging. He just sat there, holding his head and repeating a single phrase. It's over. It's all over. The dream of a sports car, of leisurely afternoons, of a social status bought with someone else's money, had all turned to smoke. He was a king who had lost his imaginary kingdom. Aunt Carol looked at the pathetic scene before her, shaking her head with a hint of sadness. She walked to stand in front of the 2 of them. My brother was very merciful, she said, her voice steady but tired. He didn't evict you from this house. This was his separate property before he was married, and he had every right to. He left you a roof over your heads. You should consider yourselves lucky for that. Then she turned to me, her gaze gentler. Come on, Isabella. There's nothing left for you here. I nodded. I tightened my grip on Lily, who was still sleeping soundly in my arms, completely unaware of the storm that had just swept through her life. I stood up, walked past the man who was once my husband, and the woman who had tormented me, without saying another word. My silence was the final judgment. As I walked out that door, I knew I was stepping out of a living hell and into the dawn. 1 year later, Lily's laughter echoed throughout our sun-filled apartment in Center City, Philadelphia. The little girl, now a beautiful, almost 2-year-old, was toddling after her grandfather. My parents had come from out of town to visit. Watching them play with their granddaughter, my heart was filled with a peace and happiness I never thought I would have. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. I had taken back my maiden name, Isabella Rossi. My small bakery, Lily's Sweets, had become a neighborhood favorite. Every morning, I woke up to the smell of butter and vanilla, greeted my regular customers, and felt a simple but profound joy. Arthur's money didn't just give me financial freedom. It gave me the opportunity to pursue my passion and build something of my own. Occasionally, I still drove to Laurel Hill Cemetery. I would place a bouquet of fresh lilies on Arthur's grave. The sky today was clear, and a gentle breeze rustled the grass. Thank you, Dad, I whispered, my hand gently stroking the cold tombstone. You gave my daughter and me a new life. I promised to live it well, and to raise Lily to be a kind and strong person, just like you. I stood there for a long time, feeling at peace. The past was behind me. Life has a strange way of balancing itself. I gave my kindness even in the darkest days, not because I expected to be repaid, but simply because it was what a person should do. In contrast, those who knew only greed and selfishness, those who sowed bitterness, in the end, only reaped a life empty and full of regret. Arthur's will didn't just give me money. It gave me an escape, a chance to start over. It affirmed that amidst cruel calculations, a small act of kindness still has the power to change a destiny. And perhaps that was the final lesson he wanted to leave behind. The greatest legacy is not what we accumulate for ourselves, but the kindness we give to others. Because in the end, it is that very kindness that will return in some way to warm our own lives.
Oh my God, you're so clumsy. This is exactly why your kind doesn't belong here. The words, sharp as shattered glass, hung in the air of the grand ballroom. A wave of cruel, knowing laughter erupted around me. I saw the flashes of phones, their screens illuminating the faces of wealthy guests in designer gowns and $1,000 suits, all eager to capture my supposed humiliation. The woman who had spoken, a proud middle-aged figure with perfectly coiffed silver hair, shrieked across the marble foyer, her voice dripping with a venomous disgust that had been cultivated over a lifetime of unearned superiority. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. You don't deserve to breathe the same air as decent people. Security! Get this disaster out of here before she breaks something valuable. People like her always cause trouble. I was on the floor. The cold of the marble seeped through the silk of my dress, a cascade of red wine blooming across the front like a grotesque flower. But as I slowly began to rise, something shifted within me. The shock receded, replaced by a glacial calm. Wine dripped from my dress onto the floor, each drop echoing in what was becoming an ominous silence. My phone was clutched in my hand, a lifeline to a world they couldn't possibly comprehend. I could feel their eyes on me, and I knew what they saw, a woman to be pitied, to be scorned. They had no idea they were looking at their own ruin. The silver-haired woman, Eleanor Ashworth, wasn't finished. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried across the now quieting room. You're wretched, you're worthless, and you will never be anything more than what you are right now, a stain on my floor. I stood up completely now, straightening my stained dress with a quiet dignity that felt like a shield. I let my gaze sweep over the faces staring back at me. Some were still smirking, others were recording, all of them convinced they were witnessing the utter destruction of someone who didn't matter. They had no idea what was coming. They were about to find out who I really was. I raised my phone to my ear, and in that moment, I could almost feel the universe holding its breath. Because what I was about to do would not only shock everyone in that room, it would utterly and completely destroy them. This was my breaking point. But to understand how devastating my response would be, you need to know who I am. And the Ashworth family was about to get the most expensive education of their lives. I am not just any woman who wandered into this gilded cage. At 45 years old, I am one of the most powerful and private CEOs in America. As the founder and sole owner of Apex Global Ventures, my net worth is conservatively estimated at over $57 billion. My journey here was paved with obstacles these people couldn't even imagine. I've sat in boardrooms where men twice my age have called me sweetheart while rejecting my proposals, only to present the same ideas as their own 6 months later. I've been told by venture capitalists that the market just isn't ready for a Black woman to lead in the energy sector. I've built my empire not just with brilliance and hard work, but with a resilience forged in the fires of 1,000 slights just like this one. I built Apex Global from a single, audacious idea sketched on a napkin in a 2-bedroom apartment I shared with my grandmother into a sprawling empire spanning renewable energy, advanced logistics, and cutting-edge biotech. I own skyscrapers in every major city, hold controlling interests in Fortune 500 companies, and employ over 100,000 people worldwide. But I have never forgotten the scent of my grandmother's kitchen, or the feel of her calloused hands. Her mantra echoes in my mind even now. Dignity, baby girl, is the one thing they can't take from you unless you give it to them. Now, let's talk about the family that had just tried to take it, the Ashworths. On the surface, they were the embodiment of old money Chicago elite. But I knew the truth. My due diligence had been thorough. Underneath the polished philanthropic exterior, they were drowning in a sea of red ink. Harrison Ashworth, the 62-year-old patriarch, had inherited his father's legendary real estate empire and had spent the last 3 decades failing to live up to the family name. Poor decisions, arrogant investments, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the modern economy had slowly eaten away at their foundation. What nobody knew was that Ashworth Properties was secretly, catastrophically bankrupt. The company that had once helped shape the Chicago skyline was now a house of cards. Harrison had been hiding the truth for months, a frantic magician moving money between shell corporations and desperately searching for a miracle. His wife, Eleanor, 58, lived in a bubble of social superiority. Her entire identity was woven from the fabric of being an Ashworth. The thought of losing her status terrified her more than financial ruin. She wielded social exclusion like a weapon, and she took a genuine, perverse pleasure in making others feel small. Their son, Preston, 28, was a walking disaster wrapped in a Tom Ford suit. He had never worked a real day in his life, had failed at every venture his father had funded, and had inherited his mother's cruelty but lacked her subtlety. Their daughter, Victoria, 26, was perhaps the most dangerous of them all. Beautiful, charming, and utterly ruthless, she had learned from her mother that cruelty could be an art form. She was Daddy's princess, and had never once faced a real consequence for her actions. But here's what none of them knew. As they stood there laughing at me, I held their entire future in the palm of my hand. The charity gala they were hosting was the stage for the biggest announcement in Ashworth history, a $1.2 billion merger with my company, Apex Global Ventures. This deal was Harrison's miracle. It would save his company and secure his family's legacy. But I, the woman they had just called worthless, wretched, and nothing, I am Serafina Jones, the CEO, founder, and sole decision-maker of Apex Global Ventures. The very woman who was supposed to sign the papers that would save their empire was now standing on their floor, covered in wine, having been racially humiliated by the very family whose future depended entirely on my signature. The most exquisite irony? Harrison had no idea what I looked like. All our negotiations had been handled through layers of lawyers and intermediaries. I value my privacy. In his mind, he probably pictured some old white businessman in a suit. The Ashworths had just committed the most expensive mistake in corporate history, and they didn't even know it yet. My nightmare didn't begin when I hit that marble floor. It began hours earlier, the moment I stepped out of my custom, armored Maybach and approached the very building I secretly owned. It was 6 p.m. on a crisp October evening. I had arrived at the Lakeshore Drive penthouse, feeling a rare sense of anticipation. I wore an elegant but understated evening gown of white silk, a custom piece from a designer whose waiting list was 2 years long. My hair was styled in intricate braids, and my jewelry was a set of simple, flawless diamonds. This was supposed to be my night, the night I would finally meet the Ashworths face to face. But the moment I stepped toward the grand, canopied entrance, a valet rushed over, not to open my door, but to redirect me. "Ma'am, service entrance is around back," he said, a dismissive thumb pointing toward the rear of the building. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "I'm sorry, I'm here for the Ashworth Gala." The valet finally looked at me, his brain short-circuiting as he tried to reconcile my appearance with his prejudice. He reluctantly pointed me toward the main entrance, but his expression said everything. He was certain I was lost. At the main entrance, a security guard named Miller stood behind a velvet rope. I watched for a few minutes, a masterclass in unconscious bias playing out before me. Guest after guest, all of them white, were waved through with warm smiles. When my turn came, the atmosphere changed. Miller took my heavy, engraved invitation, and his demeanor shifted from welcoming to suspicious. "I don't see any Jones on here," he announced, his voice loud enough for other arriving guests to turn and stare. "Could you check again, please?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the fury building inside me. He made an elaborate show of running his finger slowly down the list. "Nope, no S. Jones anywhere." "But I have the invitation right here," I pointed out. He shook his head dismissively. "Ma'am, anyone can fake these things. I'm going to need to see some identification." I handed over my driver's license. He examined it with the intensity of a forensic expert. "This doesn't look real to me," he announced loudly. "The picture doesn't even look like you." The picture looked exactly like me. But he wasn't looking for verification. He was looking for an excuse. "We're going to need to verify this with management," Miller declared. "Stepping away with both my ID and my invitation. You'll have to wait out here." And so began the longest 2 hours of my adult life. I stood outside in the cold, a silent statue of indignation, watching as hundreds of guests entered without issue. I saw businessmen I recognized from the cover of Forbes, celebrities I'd met at other events, and socialites whose foundations I had personally funded. None of them were asked for ID. None were told to wait. Every 20 minutes, Miller would reappear with a non-update. "Still checking, ma'am." But through the glass doors, I could see him chatting with other staff, laughing, making no calls. He was deliberately stalling, hoping I would give up. "Dignity, baby girl," my grandmother's voice echoed in my head, so I waited. By the time he finally returned with my documents and a grudging admission that I could enter, 2 full hours had passed. I had missed the cocktail hour, the networking, the dinner service. My excitement had curdled into a cold dread. The moment I stepped into the marble foyer of the penthouse, my penthouse Eleanor Ashworth spotted me. Oh my God, how did the cleaning lady get past security? The words cut through the party chatter like a knife. Heads turned. Harrison Ashworth boomed. This is a private event, not a job fair. Security. Preston raised his champagne glass. Did someone order maid service? I think our bathrooms could use some attention. His friends roared with laughter. Victoria giggled. She's probably looking for the broom closet. The crowd, a pack of hyenas, began to circle. I tried to speak, to explain. Actually, I'm here for... But Eleanor cut me off, her smile pure venom. Sweetheart, you're nothing. Do you understand me? This isn't your world, and it never will be. Her voice grew louder. You're wretched and pathetic, and you don't deserve to breathe the same air as us. When I tried to approach the bar for a glass of water, the bartender looked at Eleanor, who shook her head violently. No drinks for the help. She doesn't deserve even water from our glasses. For over an hour, I endured it. I stood in a corner, the object of their cruel sport. Finally, I pulled out my phone to check the merger documents. That's when Victoria made her move. She approached me with a full glass of red wine, her face a mask of fake sympathy. I feel so bad for you, she cooed. You look so thirsty. Here, let me get you something. Hope, fragile and foolish, flickered within me. I reached for the glass. As I did, she deliberately stuck out her leg. I tripped, crashing hard onto the marble floor. In the same instant, she accidentally dumped the entire glass of red wine over my white gown. Victoria gasped, a perfect performance of shock. Oh my God, you're so clumsy. I was just trying to help. Eleanor rushed over. This is exactly what happens when people forget their place. Look what you've done to our floors. Preston was already recording, laughing. This is definitely going viral. Someone call housekeeping. Oh wait, she is housekeeping. The room erupted in the cruelest laughter I had ever heard. And that's when we reached the moment where this story began. They thought this was the end. They had no idea it was just the beginning. What happened next was the moment that would haunt the Ashworth family for the rest of their lives. I began to rise from that marble floor slowly, deliberately, like a queen reclaiming her throne. Red wine dripped from my stained gown, each drop echoing in the sudden silence that was beginning to fall. My phone began to ring. I looked at the caller ID and answered, my voice an eerie calm. Apex Global, Serafina Jones speaking. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Miss Jones, this is James from Legal. The Ashworth contracts are ready for your signature. Should I bring them to the gala for the announcement? My voice remained perfectly level, but it was now laced with ice. Cancel everything, James. Every single contract. I'm sorry, Miss Jones? James's voice was confused. Could you repeat that? The entire $1.2 billion merger, the real estate deals, the technology partnerships, all of it. I looked around the room at the faces of the people who had destroyed my dignity. My voice dropped to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. Burn it all down, James. A few guests standing closest had stopped laughing. Harrison Ashworth, hearing the words billion and merger, pushed through the crowd, panic in his eyes. Excuse me, he interrupted, his voice cracking. What did you say your name was again? I ended my call and turned to face him. Serafina Jones, I said, my voice devastatingly calm. CEO and founder of Apex Global Ventures. I reached into my purse and pulled out a platinum business card, handing it to him. He took the card with trembling fingers. As the words sank in, his wine glass slipped from his other hand and crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces, just like his empire was about to. Eleanor rushed over. Harrison, what's wrong? It's just the cleaning woman. She snatched the card from his hands. As she read it, her own face went white. Her mouth fell open. This can't be real, she whispered. Harrison finally found his voice. She's the Jones. Our merger. The woman we've been negotiating with for months. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Yes, I said, my voice carrying across the now silent room. The merger that was going to save your bankrupt company. The merger that was going to keep you from losing everything your family has built over the past century. I paused. That Jones. The silence was deafening. Every single person in that penthouse suddenly understood. They had just humiliated, degraded, and racially abused the one woman who held their entire future in her hands. And I had just decided to destroy them all. What followed was the complete and utter collapse of the Ashworth Empire, executed in real time. "This is impossible!" Eleanor shrieked, clinging to her delusion. "You're nobody! This is a sick joke!" I pulled out my phone again. "Patricia, it's Serafina. Execute the Ashworth cancellations. All of them, right now." The voice on the other end was efficient. "Understood, Miss Jones. Should I also cancel the real estate leases, the technology partnerships, and the charity sponsorships?" "Everything," I replied, my eyes locked on the Ashworths. "I want every contract, every deal, every partnership completely severed. Make sure there's nothing left connecting Apex Global to the Ashworth name." I ended the call and addressed the horrified room. "Since you've all been so curious about who I am, let me introduce myself properly. I'm worth $57 billion. A collective gasp went through the room. "I own this building," I continued. "I own half the buildings where you work. I own the companies that employ your husbands, the banks that hold your mortgages, and the investment funds that manage your retirement accounts. Some of you work for me and don't even know it. And all of you just participated in racially humiliating your own economic future." "Please, Miss Jones," Harrison whispered, broken. "We didn't know who you were." I cut him off with a look. "You knew I was human, Harrison. That should have been enough." Within minutes, my legal team began to arrive. A squadron of lawyers in expensive suits. They spread out, serving notices, reading from prepared statements. By order of Apex Global Ventures, the lead attorney announced, her voice booming, "The following contracts are hereby canceled. The Ashworth Properties merger, valued at $1.2 billion. Additionally, Apex Global is calling in all outstanding loans to Ashworth Properties, demanding immediate payment in full. All lines of credit are hereby frozen." The panic started. Guests began to flee, trying to escape the blast radius. Preston, still drunk and spectacularly stupid, stumbled forward. "This is reverse racism," he shouted. "We're going to sue you." I looked at him with something akin to pity. "This isn't racism, Preston. This is consequences. Learn the difference." I made one final call. "James, I want that entire $1.2 billion redirected to our Minority Business Innovators Fund. Every penny. And issue a press release explaining exactly why." Harrison fell to his knees. "Please, Miss Jones," he pleaded. "My children, my wife, they'll have nothing." I looked down at the man who had ordered me removed like trash. "They'll have exactly what they gave me tonight, Harrison. Nothing." I walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold to deliver my final words. "Some people price themselves out of prosperity," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "Consider this your receipt." The aftermath was swift, brutal, and very public. Within 24 hours, the story had exploded across every news platform in the world. Billionaire CEO cancels $1.2 billion deal after racial humiliation at elite party. The most expensive act of racism in business history. How one family's cruelty cost them everything. The videos from the party, which the guests had originally posted to mock me, became evidence of their own destruction. The hashtag number Ashworth Racism trended globally for weeks. 1 year later, the transformation was complete and devastating. The Ashworth estate auction made international headlines. Historic Chicago penthouse sold to pay racist families' debts. The Fifth Avenue penthouse that had hosted their final party was sold for $80 million, ironically, to a consortium of minority-owned real estate companies that I had personally recommended to the auction house. The family's art collection was dispersed. Margaret's jewelry, which she had worn like armor, was auctioned off to fund a scholarship program for underprivileged students. Harrison Ashworth, once the head of a multi-billion-dollar empire, was forced to declare personal bankruptcy. At 63, he took a job as a middle manager at a small real estate firm in Queens, commuting by subway for the first time in his life. Margaret, who had once ruled Chicago's social scene, found herself completely ostracized. She was forced to move to a small apartment in New Jersey, where she worked part-time at a department store. Victoria, at 27, was a receptionist, learning what it felt like to depend on someone else for a paycheck. Preston faced the harshest consequences. His reverse racism rant had been recorded and shared millions of times. No company would hire him. At 29, he was living in a studio apartment in Newark, working at a fast casual restaurant. The family that had once owned half of Chicago was now scattered, broke, and powerless. They had traded their entire empire for a few moments of feeling superior. The $1.2 billion, now known as the Dignity Fund, became a legend in the business world. It helped launch hundreds of minority-owned businesses, creating thousands of jobs and generating billions in new revenue. One of its first recipients was a brilliant young Black woman with a revolutionary idea for sustainable packaging, an entrepreneur who had been turned down by every major venture capital firm. A year later, her company was valued at $500 million. That, I thought, was the best kind of return on investment. I never spoke of the Ashworths again. I didn't need to. The world had learned the lesson for me. Cruelty is the world's most expensive luxury, and respect isn't a privilege, it's a prerequisite. Those who fail to understand that difference do so at their own peril.